Hi, welcome and thank you for watching today. I have a lot to share in a short period of time, so I apologize if I move a bit quickly. The great thing about videos is that they're rewatchable, right? Please check out my webpage at christocora.com, watch and share my TEDx talk, How Creativity Will Save Schools. This presentation is based off of it, which is found, you can find on my webpage or on YouTube. Listen to my podcast, Hey Teachers, which goes super meta on a lot of these themes. Follow my Instagram at Hey Teachers Pod. I have many resources on my webpage, including lessons, handouts, my blog, and more. So what's this all about? Basically, I created a 6-step process to help students more easily understand the creative process in a meaningful way. And I fully integrate this into all student experiences in some way, with the goal that if students leave knowing anything from my foundation level classes, they will know how to utilize the creative process to enhance their work and life experiences, and also have a strong vocabulary for visual literacy, right? And I also think it will save education as we know it. Why? Because creative intelligence is the big human intelligence. It's the intelligence that makes us unique and binds all other forms of intelligence. The creative process inspires intrinsic motivation through curiosity as the vehicle for learning and an eagerness to build experiences of meaning through connections. It's the process that opens students up to the universe of knowledge with the goal of action, to progress, to create things of inherent value. A great deal of evidence, as well as my experiences, suggest that creativity is human learning actualized. It's how we process growth. Creativity is a powerful way to respond to so many issues we're dealing with. It's very much needed right now, maybe more than ever. But unfortunately, creativity is rarely taught, if ever purposefully and specifically enough. Students might engage in the creative process sometimes in our art classes, but even there, it might not be happening more purposefully enough. In fact, thanks to the late Ken Robinson, we know that schools kill creativity, something he confirmed 13 years ago. And by many measures, our schools have less creativity in them today. It saddens me to know that he passed without seeing larger systemic changes in education. This is also when it's no secret that creativity is overwhelmingly considered the #1 skill needed in the world, both in terms of the economy and our personal lives. What is creativity? That's something we're going to cover. We'll go deeper into curiosity and imagination. We'll talk about how I prime students for these conversations. I'll share my 6 steps in action, as well as my diagram. Ultimately, if you have followed along with my work at all and end up listening to the TED Talk, there are 3 major facts that drive my educational philosophy. Creativity is widely considered the #1 skill needed in the world. That's number 1. I just said this, but I believe it is the big human intelligence that drives and connects all other forms of human intelligence. And it's the major lens that we should be applying to education. My second major fact is that school is not a race. On the surface level, this seems really obvious, but it is a very real reality that we have made of school a race. What's even more crazy is that we've made it a race in which we expect everyone to finish at the exact same time and run in the exact same way. Seems absurd, but it's true. And this is a sub-fact between kind of like 2 and 3, the idea that everyone should know the exact same things, hold the same facts, have the same exact useless information that they can probably look up in their phones anyway. The third fact is that autonomy is fundamental to learning. Self-directing freedom and moral independence to personally connect to, enjoy what they're doing. In other words, choice. Every single one of the 1,000 students I have worked with are unique, with unique skills and challenges, personalities, interests, and fears, abilities, and they learn in different ways. Our current structure doesn't allow for much autonomy among students, and so I think we should conceive of an education system, one in which students have agency, the choice to drive their own learning and putting it into the world. This is the result of these 3 facts. It also happens that each of these are also crucial to cultivating the creative process. Okay, so with those facts in mind, I also accept a great deal of duality in my own conceptualization of the education process. I can and have found that I enjoy holding together 2 truths at the same time that seem in conflict with each other. I like to call this contrasting harmony, a term I use to describe differing points of view coming together to make something beautiful, which is why I'd love to hear your perspectives on this work, especially those that seem to contrast with my own, because that will help everyone form a more complete view of the creative process and learning that can serve a greater variety of people in unique ways. I believe that almost everyone has the ability to learn most things, but recognizing our aptitudes or interests in different areas and allowing freedom to develop that skill is powerful. Being open and curious, finding a solution, taking action, and then reflecting on that action, and exploring, building relationships, using the most important cognitive tool, our imaginations, to make all of the capital C connections. These are all elements or ingredients of the creative process, which require us to put our thoughts into action. This is how we learn, by doing. So what is it? It's a truly huge concept, kind of like the show Lost. As with many things, the further I dive into it, the larger and more confusing it becomes. My main goal is to try and simplify it for students so that they can make the journey of self-discovery and growth for themselves. My simple explanation of creativity, or how I sell it to students, well, the root word of creativity is create. Some define creativity as the ability to make something of value, but it goes so much further than this. For humans, creativity is cognition. It gets to the nature of how the universe builds by copying, transforming, and combining. My definition of creativity is a process of learning and creation that happens through connections across multiple forms of intelligences, beginning as a mental process and ending in a physical manifestation of the concept. Thought must produce action. Here's my diagram that includes the 3 stages and 6 steps. It's available for download on my website at chrissicora.com. The creative process is not always linear. It's a fluid process that ebbs and flows and circles back and forth. And I'm not sold on the fact that it ever arrives at a destination, because the journey is the destination. Nor am I married to my own structure. What I know is that creativity can be taught as much as any other subject, and that I have found a roadmap that works in an educational setting for me and some others, and I want to share that with you, because saving education and stuff. Because many of the words associated with this process are missing from our current systems. Students finding inspiration to engage, the autonomy, cultivating relationships, taking risks, failing, asking questions, getting immersed in a process, interpreting, applying relevant, meaningful things to situations, to practical situations, and receiving feedback from others to improve after the grade. Creativity is part of a feedback loop that allows us to let go of our ego in the name of progress for everyone, growing from a soil of curiosity that I'll explain a little bit more in a moment. We need to feel creative in order to feel alive, engage, and be ready for whatever life will throw at us. When I survey students about whether or not they have ever purposefully learned about the creative process, about 12% say that they have. The most important skill 12% have learned about by the time they come to my class in high school, many of which are juniors and seniors. So it goes without saying that they don't have a relationship with the concepts I'm going to share with them, or the art processes I'll be teaching. Heck, they really even struggle to make choices for themselves. So I need to prime them for these conversations, and here's how I do it. The very second day of class, I engage them in the Creative Materials Challenge. I made a remote version of this experience in video form, which is available on my website. What I do in a normal in-person setting is bring a bunch of materials in, place them into groups, divide the students into groups, and then tell them to make something with the goal of winning the points I have written on the board. For a remote situation, I ask them to go on a scavenger hunt throughout the neighborhood or their houses, collect materials, and then make something with them. The goal is to win points for most aesthetically pleasing, most creative use of materials, and or tallest. Here are 3 examples. Then we have a critique, and I ask them a ton of questions about their process, illuminating the creative process they use to make the structures of our artwork. I'm trying to get them to think about their thinking, how they work with others, and get them making stuff, engaging in action on day 2. Day 1 is just the syllabus and introductions. Day 2, we make stuff. Another resource I use very early on with students is the Everything is a Remix video series made by Kirby Ferguson. There are 4 main parts, and then he made a 5th extra one, and I highly recommend checking them out at his website, everythingisaremix.info. He presents a basic equation to creativity that illuminates the derivative nature of creativity, and I make sure that most students leave the semester knowing it well. Copy, transform, and combine. They connect closely to my own first 3 steps in the creative process: influence, connections, and innovation. His videos illuminate how most creations are combinations of previous things, how ideas are tangled and not personal property, and then explores the spectrum of the familiar versus the novel, and why things that find balance between them are often more successful. Another video resource I use is the Shots of Awe channel on YouTube. Check out the Ecstasy of Curiosity one first, and only watch the earlier ones. The new ones don't really relate as much. Here's a quote that I adapted from a Khalil Gibran quote, and I think it's important that creativity comes through us, is not from us. It doesn't belong to us. It speaks to the derivative nature of creativity, the collaborative nature of it, and it's really important to understanding everything else that I'm about to talk about. And that brings us to curiosity. It's one of the biggest elements that kept coming up in my research on creativity as being a significant part of it. It is only rivaled by imagination in that way. From a neural point of view, it appears to be vital with regards to neuroscience and learning in the neuroscience of mindfulness, social emotional learning, and even the neuroscience on addiction, habits, and changing behaviors. I refer to it as the soil through which we grow creativity, and I would extend that to all learning. Honestly, without curiosity, it seems we never learn. Because at its core, curiosity is about an open eagerness to learn something new. Dr. Shauna Shapiro explored in her book about mindfulness, Good Morning, I Love You, sharing studies on how she shared studies on how a curious mind leads to mindfulness and greater creative results. There's also ample evidence on how much stress can impede creativity. In his book, Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life, Nir Eyal explains that the best way to respond to bad habits or things we want to change in ourselves is by approaching it with curiosity, like having a conversation with a caring friend whose only interest is to see you grow through a dialogue of thoughtful reflection. Curiosity is a source of intrinsic motivation, which is proven to be the best motivator for learning, not things like grades, test scores, and check boxes, which just end up creating more unhealthy stress. It's deeply associated with affection. Piaget went so far as to say that learning does not happen without it. If we aren't interested and don't particularly enjoy the content, we're very unlikely to learn it. Curiosity is the soil of learning because it puts us in the mental state required to be open to the world, to build relevance in the content, and motivates us towards the meaningful rigor required to actualize our intelligences. Everyone knows that Einstein failed at school, but few know why. He couldn't handle the factory approach to learning. He eventually fled and ended up in a Swiss school that he said nurtured his curiosity. And he's famous for saying, "I have no special talent, I'm only passionately curious." In a nutshell, curiosity exists as a group of behaviors and traits that ping-pongs between the urge to probe the unknown out of intrinsic epistemic desire and the need to close gaps of understanding that cause us discomfort. Curiosity doesn't sit well. Eventually, it drives us to do things, to make things happen. It's deeply related to motivation, a sense of awe, and authentic learning. And there are different types, such as D type and I type. D type is curiosity is experiencing a feeling of deprivation. D for deprivation, and then curiosity is a feeling of interest. I for interest. I type is related to pleasure rather than need. I'm working on an infographic on curiosity and another one on imagination as well that I'm going to talk about in a sec, but there's only so much time in the day and I haven't finished them yet. The other types include perceptual curiosity, which involves interest in and giving attention to novel perceptual stimulation. Sensory curiosity, which is people in these people seek stimuli in order to provoke a sensory response, often associated with like risk or thrill. Epistemic curiosity is a desire to obtain new knowledge. Interpersonal curiosity, a person with interpersonal curiosity is deeply interested in and driven by meeting and learning about people. It is deeply related to mindfulness and stress. The mindful attitudes of curiosity help you welcome all of your senses, noting what you see, smell, hear, touch, and taste. Each detail acts as a tiny hook that morphs our brain to Velcro vivid, powerful, and positive experiences. Important ingredients include autonomy, the ability for students to connect to themselves and their world and to the learning, moving beyond student-centered to student-controlled. Affection, liking what we're doing, a growth mindset, and openness to grow through thoughtful reflection, having the time and space for exploration. Also, being outside and in nature has been strongly linked to an enhanced curiosity. But essentially, the simple recipe is create time and space, allowing for the quest or journey of learning to take place. It's not a race. A decent and well-placed dose of the self and enjoyment. I go much deeper into these concepts on my podcast episodes on curiosity. Again, you can find that on my webpage, chrissecor.com. Wish we had more time, but I must move on to another big concept, imagination. It could be argued, and I will, that imagination is the conduit through which we experience cognition, and in fact, it is cognition. At the very least, it's a prerequisite to authentic educational activity by connecting the different ingredients of learning and giving meaning to the experience. Because it actually is the mechanism through which the mind manifests meaning by connecting perception with emotion and intellect, thought, and more. It builds on curiosity, extending the humanistic and exploratory aspects of curiosity into interpretation, comprehension, and then application. It is the engine or the light of curiosity. On a practical level, imagination is being able to perceive something without any physical stimulus, because we don't see with our eyes, we see with our brain. When I say the word skyscraper, you can picture that in your brain, even though it's not actually right in front of you. Neuroscientist Samir Zeki wrote on this, and I paraphrase, the overall function of creativity is an extension of the function of the brain, the ability to form meaning from sensory information or imagine in the absence of sensory information. It has been defined as the ability to think of things as possible, a source of flexibility and originality in human thinking. They say that empathy only extends as far as our sight, and the imagination is the capacity to extend our perceptions indefinitely. Let's go a little deeper. So there are 8 types that this guy Murray Hunter created. I highly suggest you look him up, Murray Hunter types of imagination. There are downloadable PDFs of this list, and he goes into detail on it. I'm also working on an infographic that will include them in very short description. But here they are. 1, effectuative imagination, which basically combines information, usually from experiences together, to synergize new concepts and ideas. It's very short and fleeting and also very flexible. Intellectual or constructive imagination originates from a defined and well-developed thought structure. It is utilized when considering and developing hypotheses from different pieces of information or pondering over various issues of meaning. I'm using quite a bit of it right now. Imaginative fantasy works in the surreal, the mythical. It's how we create and develop stories, pictures, poems, stage plays, and more expressive surreal forms of narratives. It's very transformative. This is a big one, and I really huge subject onto itself. Empathy, which is described by many others as a form of imagination as well. It's how we connect with others and what they are feeling. It's what helps our minds to detach itself from oneself and see the world from someone else's feelings, emotions, pain, and reasoning. Has so many uses and is instrumental to the human condition. Then there is strategic imagination, which is concerned about the vision of what could be, the ability to recognize and evaluate opportunities by turning them into mental scenarios that can be played out in our heads. It's interested in predictions and making plans. Not to be confused with empathy, number 6 is emotional imagination. Simply put, without imagination serving as a bridge, emotion would not be able to emerge from our psyche and manifest as feelings, moods, and dispositions. You're familiar with this one, dreams, which are an unconscious form of imagination made up of images, ideas, emotions, and sensations occurring during certain stages of sleep. And though it is the 8th, and might get overlooked in the conversation, it carries considerable implications for our everyday lives, especially as it relates to our senses of history and self. And it's also subconscious, much like dreams. I'm talking about memory reconstruction, which is the process of retrieving our memory of experiences and relationships, consisting of a mix of truth and belief, influenced by emotion, among other things, and it includes heavy elements of identity. This is often reconstructed to fit into our current view of the world, so it's very selective, and it really has to be said that while our brains are freaking amazing, capable of tremendous awesomeness, they are also super biased machines, and imagination does have a dark side, which I explore in greater depth in other elements. Kieran Egan's stages of imagination, Egan argued that stages of the imagination develop in a logical order, much like children develop cognitively. Some of his stages include, and in this order, binary opposites like basic good versus evil, song, rhythm and rhyme has long created harmony between memory, expression, and learning in human development, stimulating imagination in powerful ways. Fantasy then allows us to go outside the bounds of reality for connections to our world and form personally unique narratives. And then you move into the abstract thinking, allowing us to move beyond concrete and separate meaning into metaphor, which allows us to significantly shift from binary thought as a source of ideas, expanding understanding and duality of truth. And then narrative, and in the same way I see empathy as a big type of imagination, Stories are possibly the most powerful, effective cognitive tool within the stages of imaginative development. This is where and when higher level cognition emerges from language expression and the need to convey meaning through stories. Then there's also humor. Jokes can also enhance the imagination and are rich in metaphor and story. And last, just for right now, I want to preview Rudolf Steiner with his particular focus on the 3 elements of learning he has in the imagination, which are integral to his structure and an investigation of imagination and education. His 3 elements essentially are the 3 aspects of the psyche or a human being, which are now currently fragmented, broken, and separated by traditional education systems. And he says we need to put those 3 back together. They are thinking, feeling, and will. I liken will to my own structure of curiosity. He also offers a great theme in the fixed versus flexible conversation. He suggests that concepts can either be fixed or flexible depending on how they are formed. And I see this more as a spectrum between the two. It emphasizes the difference between memorizing facts versus having knowledge. And there should be balance between the two. There's a time and a place for fixed, like in math, and flexible, where they are purely created through cognition when learners experience it for themselves through exploration. Okay, so let's get to the stages and steps of the creative process I use to teach students, and start by circling back to curiosity. So phase 1 of the creative process, the stage 1, is curiosity, right? This is a lot about reaching out outward to make personal connections that motivate and fuel the entire process. It includes the 3 steps: influence, connections, and innovation. Everything I'm about to share is integral to my process with students. I want them to have an intimate relationship with the following steps and use it during their reflections and our conversations. So step 1, influence. Why are you doing what you're doing? Oftentimes this starts from me, the teacher, assigning something. This is what influenced the student to make a certain artwork. Of course, the goal is to get students intrinsically motivated. But what even influences them beyond this point? What inspires them? How do they search for inspiration? Can one manufacture inspiration? Isaac Newton said creation requires influence. This is the beginning, the why. I utilize such tools as the internet, social media for good. Pinterest is a huge source of influence as well. The fundamental question I'm asking at this point is, what did you research? Did you even do any research? Because what's the first thing you should do when you have any type of assignment given to you? Look up what others think about it, what others have done. Collect a ton of artifacts and ideas, because that collection is going to start to marinate in your brain and produce connections. I always ask them to self-assess how much effort they're putting into this part of the process and other parts of the process as well. We start by copying what others have done, learning from others by emulating them, and then we combine it. We start to connect it with ourselves. Which brings us to connections. Creativity flows through you, but it is not from you. Most ideas have been thought by others. What matters is our unique perception of those ideas. What happens to an idea or a process when it's filtered through your unique psyche? How do you connect to the media? Making connections is an integral part of the creative process and accessing our imaginations, which is the vehicle for much of this work. And this step is a big one, but it's also broad. It involves making personal connections, students building meaning for themselves, accessing their memories, and connecting a concept to a personal experience. It's also about connecting to other people, acknowledging and embracing the derivative nature of creativity, but also how other viewpoints, talking with others through our process, getting feedback from others enhances our creative outcomes. No one ever does anything alone. It also involves connecting themes, concepts, and content, such as, how does this science concept connect with this art process? How can I connect this moment in history with art to make a stronger statement? Studies have shown a great deal of correlation between enhanced outcomes when people work across different content areas at the same time and build on interdisciplinary connections. This is yet another reason why the silos of content we've built, dividing content as existing in isolation rather than building off the interconnected of things, is so damaging to our development and creativity. Our brains did not evolve this way. We thrive off of making connections across disciplines. On a simple level, as highlighted in the Everything is a Remix series, this is combining things to make something new. Something I try to do with my students is to get them to see inspiration everywhere so that they can look at mundane objects and connect it with a project they're currently working on. I recently had a student investigating characters design, and he got stuck. Where to start? So I started suggesting he find a random object in his house that stood out and draw it. He actually found a weird shaped rock I sent him the prompt, furry and green, to add to that rock. And he took it from there. He problem solved and innovated that initial drawing of a rock, and that morphed over a few sketches into something even more unique and more original. The rock was a source of inspiration, a major connection to a goal. The rock seemingly had nothing to do with it, though, and then the pathway to innovation. This also brings to mind something else about creativity. It often likes limitations. Myself and others refer to this as the box strategy. Steve Jobs once said that something along the lines of, we need boundaries so we know where to push. When you push on one side, it's interesting to see what pops out the other side of the box. This is how I help students with the monster. How I help that student with the monster illustration. You can check out a short blog post I wrote about this topic of limitations on my website at chrissecor.com. One of the best examples of this stage of connections, though, that I have and that I use with my students is mind mapping. This is the vehicle I use to teach students the fundamentals of the stage. We start with a concept such as like the environment, and then start spitballing thoughts and connections, some of which go off on their own in these weird tangents. On that for a sec, the donut effect. It's a term I've coined to refer to meeting students where they are and the unforeseen connections and results that can manifest from it. I had another teacher ask me once, but I teach 7th grade boys, and 7th grade boys will make jokes about this serious concept. And I responded by saying, let them. It's where they are. It's how they process. And no one will learn anything by avoiding their current biological and cognitive realities. And I shared this anecdote. Long story short, during a mind mapping exercise about the environment, a student, thinking he was so funny, blurted out, donuts. A few students started laughing. He thought he was the bee's knees, and then I wrote it on the board. Students were kind of surprised by that. One student asked why I wrote it on the board, and that because it had nothing to do with the environment. And I asked the student who said it why he then said it, and he got a bit more serious, saying it was because he was hungry and saw a Homer Simpson sticker earlier. And I said, oh, that's actually kind of creative. Anyhow, another student ended up using this donut theme in his artwork about the environment. He made a series of very successful stencils, actually, connecting to the Dunkin' Donuts logos and phrase, America runs on donuts, except that he changed the donut to an oil barrel, and it said, America runs on oil. So meet students where they are. You never know what connections will come out of it, but no matter what, it's more authentic, and student agency is one of the most important ingredients. But I thought this was a good example of how we can combine and connect seemingly unrelated things as well. Step 3 is innovation or transformation. This is when students simultaneously focus their thoughts in a more specific direction, but also experiment a great deal with the elements of that theme. This is when I'm doing most of my problem solving with them. They've been inspired, made their connections, and now they care more about what they're doing. Most of the profound conversations I have with students happens here. It's the most heavy thinking phase. They're at that point when they become little visionaries, thinking and visualizing hard, but haven't quite brought any of it into the physical existence. There might be some light sketching happening, some experimenting with techniques, colors, etc., but for the most part, it's still in their heads. A few short strategies / activities I do with students to help them internalize the first 3 steps are simple collage projects and prompts like find 3 pages and fold them in a way to make something new. Make 3 or 5 move collages using 2 principles of design. These normally take 1 or 2 class periods and often produce surprisingly powerful results. They're very surface level and fun. Students even often ask me to continue making more after that, actually. Sometimes the process at this point goes much deeper. Let me share a conversation I recently had with a student who was experiencing anxiety around the innovation step, which involves a great deal of problem solving, as I said, and decision making, which carries a lot of anxiety with it. I'm actually really want to write a blog post about anxiety and creativity at some point, because I think they're really related. Anyway, the student was stuck and stressing out about it. They had their influence, their goal, their basic concept, and all the materials. They had connected with a variety of media and resources, was even sketching some ideas on a tablet before moving to the physical canvas, which happens to be a roller skate. The student was going to paint on a roller skate, and of course, didn't want to make any mistakes on it. And they were starting to stress out and feel anxiety, losing traction. If used correctly, I actually think these can be positive feelings in the right environment with the right supports. But anyway, having the creativity diagram with the easily identifiable steps and phases helped me to facilitate this conversation with the student, to help them understand what was happening and bring it to a more comprehensible experience. It allowed them to reflect on what they were going through. and embrace and find support. We talked about how people feel anxiety most at certain parts of the creative process, many at this particular point because of the choice and problem solving taking place, because of the permanence of that next jump into the physical, of moving from curiosity into creation, or in other words, the action. And then we talked about how these feelings or anxiety often manifest later in the end of the process, when students often struggle with finishing their projects for similar reasons. And this exchange was an act of metacognition and brought together socio-emotional learning with logical thinking. The student ended up commenting on how once they got past this part, they really enjoyed the work stage of just immersing themselves in the process and enjoying the ride, but that this part took more mental effort. The work took more physical. And then I asked them, how do you perceive that effort on a scale? Is it higher or lower? And right now, are you at your desk, you're thinking really hard. In a day or two, you'll be plugging away on a physical roller skate, making marks with the paint on the surface with extreme focus to the mark itself. The two acts appear to involve the same amount of effort. And the student thought for a bit and then said, maybe effort is the wrong word. I'm thinking more right now, and I have to focus a lot more energy on that thought. It's mental, which feels like more effort to me than making. And I replied, you mean that you having to be mindful about your actions and reflecting on them is different than just doing something? Are the majority of our students making the motions, or are they thinking about their thinking and being mindful of their actions? Once we thought so hard, we can move on to stage 2, the creation phase, which goes inward, focusing on immersive experiences, allowing our thoughts to manifest in the physical action, cementing neural connections, and therefore learning. And step 4 is the prototype, the sketching step, making drafts, testing our assumptions through these drafts and sketches that take what's inside our heads and puts it into the world to reflect and continue evolving. This is a great time to embrace failure and receive feedback. Failure is such an important aspect of growth and learning. The way that our education systems have treated failure is downright criminal. This is why incorporating a growth mindset is so crucial right now. Dealing with failure has a lot to do with how we set up the environment. I have a blog post that goes more deeply into failure and growth mindset, but this is the key. Focusing on the process, which asks us to slow down, is a huge part. It's hard for students to manage failure when they're constantly racing. Making prototypes requires enough care and time to avoid jumping right in. It helps students to avoid quitting because things get too hard. This is a great time within the process for reflection of the expected results. We must allow time for students to reflect. Too often I see teachers rushing to the next lesson without pause for reflection. Without this step, students won't truly absorb the experience. The prototype step is also when we start to connect the head, the heart, and the hand. You are taking the emotional and the logical process into the physical, connecting the head, the heart, and the hand. My favorite definition of art is that it's something that connects those things. Beyond this, I think you get into trouble trying to define art. Most of my students have agreed that art must be something that is physical in some way. And this is actually the SCAD's, a new logo they're using, by the way, that I love for that reason. Once you have tested, created a blueprint, thought enough, received some feedback from other points of view, you're ready to go to the work stage, the hard part, the 10,000 hours of practice needed to master something, recognizing that the journey is the destination. And many people find Zen in the methodical part of this process of immersion. The work is establishing a conversation with ourselves. You do something, put it out into the world, and then you listen to it. You respond. You are learning, reflecting, responding within the context of full immersion into a process. It's meaningful rigor, not busy work, because we care about it. Most of you are familiar with the steps, so I won't go too much into it. This is really what we all do as teachers, we're making the art. Not that you're not familiar with everything else I've also recently said. Creation through destruction is a quote I've always been fond of from Rauschenberg. I've had many students who have learned more from epic failures, but it really just seems like a fundamental reality of the universe that often crucial things are born out of epic destruction. And sometimes the most important thing in the creative process is just to jump in and do it, make something. Here's actually a great example of that, where a student made
Wait, is this the right place?
Used her face to paint.
Can you tell me this is the right place?
truly brought herself into the process.
Okay. Go for it.
So she puts saran wrap.
Yeah.
That's my favorite part. The way her face looks after she feels defeated. It didn't go how she wanted, but she just jumped in and did something, right? I love it as an example of the work stage. Then there's the all-important critique stage or phase. Though it's the final, it should happen really throughout and often sends us back to the first stage. I mentioned that after innovation or after the prototype, it's a good time to reflect. Much like the rest of the process is inherently collective or collaborative, but especially so because we need other people's perspectives in order to see ours more clearly, more completely. For one, I can't critique my own work. I always need to hear what other people have to say about it, but I'm great at critiquing other people's work. It helps us to see beyond our own biases, and we're too close to the process, right? It's not objective. The sixth step is reflecting. It's qualitative assessment, taking criticism by fully embracing a growth mindset, the feedback loop of creativity. Reflection allows us to let go of our ego in the name of progress for everyone, growing out of that soil of curiosity. I like to use this video right here called Austin's Butterfly Critique from an expeditionary school. It's on YouTube. You can look it up, Austin's Butterfly Critique. The video shows students across various young ages offering thoughtful suggestions for growth on a student's drawing of a butterfly. My students love watching the kids' responses as the messages of growth mindset is easily absorbed for them. We all have our bag of tricks when it comes to critique, but I think many of us use it too infrequently. Honestly, it's also really important to me here. My goal is for students to end up craving critical feedback about their work and even themselves. That when hearing someone share what they feel is wrong about something they have done, that they open to it through a curious mind and are thankful for the opportunity to improve. This honestly carries over to students' self-reflections, which I give students throughout the process. With longer, more choice-based projects, I provide them one that connects to the cell competencies. I found that these actually correlate very well with the 6 steps of the creative process. Influence is about self-awareness, the first part of the cell competencies. Connecting is about social awareness and relationship skills. As is critique. Innovation connects well to self-management and decision-making, which carries on into the work process and making a prototype of drafts, which is about predicting consequences. Students fill out these self-assessments while they're working. It's integrated authentically into their creative process, such as with the Create Your Own Adventure unit I made with 3 other teachers as part of the IAEA's Collaboration for Experience. It's a remote unit based on narrative and socio-emotional learning and choice. Students follow prompts to investigate themselves more deeply through the artistic process, and I integrated many of my self-assessment strategies throughout this unit. You can check it out on IAEA's website, search for resources collaborating for excellence. Hopefully I'll share the link somehow too with you. This is also the case when I'm having students build their own projects outside of any theme I've provided, like totally self-driven. I provide them workbooks that help them navigate the process, following through each stage purposefully and meaningfully. It's what helped these Art 1 students collaborate to make a life-size Barbie about dysmorphia. I have the workbook, which goes through the first 4 steps on my website, available for download. I believe it even uses one of these students' examples for that Barbie project. And my major goal as an educator is that students leave my classroom with a clear and practical understanding for this creative process, which also teaches them to be more curious and open to the world, how to make choices, embrace failure and criticism, and make things of value. Again, I think of these 6 steps more as a big picture diagram that makes it easier for educational leaders to comprehend and for students to visualize and then utilize in their learning, which in turn facilitates authentic experiences of value for themselves and the world. It's not meant to be a strict set of instructions. It ebbs and flows and circles and often becomes a tangled mess. Things don't always work out, but most of my students can identify the parts of the whole and understand the work behind each part. And the work is really during the in-between, the conversations, the struggles, reflections, epiphanies. And this doesn't exactly manifest the same way for everyone, nor should it. I wish I had more time to share more, but we are beyond our time limit for this presentation. Thank you so much for watching. Again, check out my resources. Follow me at HeyTeachersPod on Instagram, chrissicora.com. Thank you so much. Cheers.